So I'm really
Sure.
happy that you joined me today, Lori Niles-Hofmann, to speak about issues in workplace learning. And maybe if you could just start by talking a little bit about your expertise in the area.
Sure. And also, thank you very much for having me and inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk with you, Sarah. So, what I do is started off as a traditional instructional designer and gradually moved my way into ed tech, implementing for my sins dozens of learning management systems. At the time, they would have just been not even LXPs, implementing those at a global level for companies at around the 50,000 employee level. And the more that I got into those weeds, the more that I started to see data, the more I got to see how things could be interconnected into the HRIS or into different systems. And now you add AI on top of that, and it's fascinating. So, what I do with companies mostly is I help them, I work with CLOs on basically their ed tech strategy and their people analytics strategy and how those two are going to work together. And it really culminates in something I call the 8 levers. So the 8 things that you need to do. And that's me.
And you recently published a book about those 8 levers.
I did, yes. So the 8 levers of EdTech transformation, which I laughed because my mom had a copy and she texted me and said, "You write with great clarity. I didn't understand all of it." I was like, "Thanks, mom." So that's the endorsement on the book from my mother. But yes, there is a book. It's available on Amazon. My publisher will be happy for me to say that, or you can reach out to me. But yeah, it is specifically about those 8 levers, and I designed it to be a how-to guide. Really, like these are the mistakes I've made. Don't do them. These are the things you should be thinking about. Everything from content strategy to data to stakeholder management to knowledge management, all of that is encompassed in it.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, so you're coming from a wealth of experience and expertise. I was looking forward very much to the chance to speak with you because um there are a couple of things that I've been grappling with myself as an instructional designer who's still just an instructional designer.
Don't say
And
just. Don't say just.
I need to evolve. I need to evolve with the times. I need to figure out how my role is changing. And part of how I see my role changing is trying to figure out what are the high value human skills that are needed in the workplace and trying to
Right.
figure out how best to support people to develop those skills over the
Right.
next few years.
Very, very good point. And I like the phrase that you describe me as wealth of experience rather than old. So thank you so much. I
I
love
can't
that.
thank you. I will never.
Yeah, perfect. And don't say just instructional designer because there's so much theory and science and craft to that, that we do not want to lose. Like, I don't want us to go into mass production. I think of good instructional designer as almost like a luthier, building a guitar and knowing it. Yeah, I mean, I could have a factory do it, but it will not sound the same at the end. There will be a missing element to it that you will hear when it's performed upon. But when we talk about, human and people and the hybrid of the two of them together and what skills they're going to need, you're going to hear the same ones come up and up, right? Critical thinking. Well, why? Because you can't believe 90% of what comes out of AI, and you have to look at it with a critical, lens. That's no problem. But then we come across things. We were speaking prior to this, about creativity. How do you use? I don't know. I'm just going to use ChatGPT as sort of a catch-all for when I'm talking about Claude, or I'm talking about any of the other ones that are Gemini and everybody up there. But it can become a sparring partner if you know how to use that. You can say, all right, I'm looking for a metaphor for this particular topic. Can you help me think of some of this? Or let's brainstorm that and push it. A lot of people don't even know if you go into ChatGPT and others, you can actually set the creativity level on it to say
Right.
whether I want it to be high creativity or low. That's another example where you're going to have the human, but the human is pushing it as far as it could go. What I also find really interesting about that hybrid, and this has shaped my thinking about what the AI and human intersection is I was listening to a talk by Cassie Kozaroff, and I'm sure I said the surname wrong, but her point was, don't just use AI for the things that you can do and they'll do it faster. I mean, that's one use case. Use AI for the things that we can't do. to problem solve for the things that we haven't been able to problem solve for. And that I found really, really exciting and interesting. So even thinking of things like, what's the most common question that I used to get when I did pure instructional design? Can you make it shorter? Can we make 3 days into one, right? Okay. Well, yes, could we get the same results? That would be to me an excellent sparring conversation to have with an LLM to say, okay, how can I compress some of this? Might I do this? What might it look like? You play it back and forth. These are the most critical, these are the most critical learning objectives. How do we weight them? So stuff like that. Yes, a human could do it, but a human also too would benefit from having that type of debate, back. So these are different ways that you can use the tools other than, can you write something for me?
Right. I
Mm,
just right away my head did go to what's the difference between going to an LLM to have that
mm,
conversation
mm,
versus a fellow instructional designer, who I know has
mm.
experience in this kinda area, and I get some feedback from them instead.
You can absolutely go to one. I think what you get from using an LLM is that you can it's going to first of all go through a larger body of knowledge for good or bad. Okay, let's be really, really clear, for good or for bad. So it is going to be scraping against that. There's also an element of neutrality in the sense of when you talk to a colleague. It is a human interaction that can come with, baggage, or, they know things about you. There's assumptions and all that. I find it can sometimes be, it's not better or worse, but a different conversation that you would be having with, say, a chat GPT. You can get them to be harder on you than you maybe would expect from a colleague, to give you that bluntness, because you will be accepting of that. So I think it's a different type of conversation. But again, not better or worse. But I do also think there is the benefit of the wider body of knowledge. Now that said, you also maybe, for stuff like that, you'd probably want to be looking at a custom GPT, one that has been trained in specifically in instructional design or learning experience design. And there are some of those out there. You can also to Dr. Philippa Hardman. Everyone's probably heard of her. She's done some amazing, I shouldn't say some, she's done an incredible amount of great work. And you look at her epiphany, and how that has been trained on really good learning principles. So yeah, it's really about how far you wanna take it and how comfortable you are.
So, you did mention both critical thinking and creativity at the beginning, 'cause we did talk, briefly before we started recording, and for me, those could be a couple of the skills that employees in the workplace need to develop because they may be things that I don't know. Are those skills that are kind of more human skills that we don't want to slough off to an AI partner, or are we looking, because if there's I didn't know there was a creativity l- button.
Yeah,
So in my naive way, I'm thinking, well, at least humans still get to be like creative and critical thinkers.
yeah.
But maybe that's a really still simplistic way of looking at it.
I don't think it's a simplistic way, and I mean, the question is what is creativity? And I mean, it's an arbitrary definition of what creativity is. And if you really look at how AI, it's a fancy algorithm, right? It's pattern recognition, and in how it responds to you. So creativity, even of that, is an abstract construct where it's just saying, think of things that don't normally appear together, and throw them out. That's a very basic way of looking at. But I also think there's other things to use it for. It's stuff that maybe we relied on humans to do that wasn't always that easy. Like for example, organizational skills. That's a really or planning. Those are things that, yeah, you can say in time management. Um, there's some incredible ways to use AI for those sorts of things that maybe take some of the cognitive load off of people who struggle with some of those things. Somebody who's maybe not neurotypical, or somebody with ADHD, can be brilliant for that, because putting that person on a course over and over and over again is not going to solve for the core problem, but these can also then be tools for people to work with. So I think it's just about broadening. We say, okay, the human skills are always going to be more important, and they are. But if we also look at the direction that some of the tech is going is becoming remarkably human. And so do we use the tools to also to augment our own humanity or humanness? Which I'm not even sure if that's a word, but yeah, so it is starting to get quite blurry and quite murky. But I think, the bare minimum when we talk about the skills that you're going to need in this new world, probably the thing for me really is just being discerning and being questioning, because you don't know what is fake, what is but was a hallucination, what is being fed to you. That's when we start getting into some really scary territories.
So
Mm.
when I think about what it means to have discernment,
Mhm.
for me, it's kind of a lot of experience and
Yeah.
developing skills in a certain kind of area.
Mhm.
And we're, I speak for myself. I'm of the generation where, yeah, I was not available for the majority of my career
Right.
and work
Same.
experience. Yeah.
Same.
So, so whatever discernment I have, and I won't make a
Yeah.
qualification on my own discernment, but
Yeah.
whatever I have, I achieved by doing the work that I did.
Correct.
So if that remains one of the key skills that humans need to bring to the job, how do they develop that discernment if they're not kind of like doing all that work to get to where we might have gotten?
I mean, I think you have to do the work. That's probably one of the big points are, or you at least need to know where to go to get validity checked, or how to check validity. So it might be, as it used to be, if somebody's using too many M dashes, or somebody is, somebody is, the hands have six fingers or something like that. But those things are getting, better and better and better, and we see less and less of it. But I think it comes down to practice. I think it also too comes down to not just blindly trusting what is there, and being, just questioning even what's put in front of you at all times, even if it sounds completely plausible. So that ability to do more research, or talk to that person beside you, or bring it into your own context. But that said, as it improves and gets better and better and better, um, mm, it's going to be harder and harder for humans. It's going to be very, 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 very hard.
I wanted to say, so what do we do?
That's what I do.
And what happened?
Oh, do
Guess
I have the answers? Do I have the answers? No, and I think flipping it around, I'm talking about the dark side of things, right? And if we bring it back into, say a learning context, if somebody is at work, hopefully they're not going to be presented with, a fake video asking them to enter in their Bitcoin and all of those sorts of stuff. I would hope. Although there was a case, I think it was in Korea or Japan, where a worker was duped into thinking that he was speaking with his CEO, and the CEO was asking him to perform a really terrible transaction that was going to take money out of the banks, and yeah, and he fell for it because it was a video and it seemed very, very, very plausible. So I think there's definitely things like that. So but there's always going to be that chase, and cops and robbers kind of happening around. I mean, think of when we first got the internet. All of a sudden everything was a scam. Don't click on a pop-up, right? That was what happened. The first thing with phones, it didn't take very long, I'm sorry to say, and I know this is a podcast, but for somebody to make a crank call, that's just became part of the technology. So I think there's now nobody even answers their phone. If it comes up unknown caller, nobody picks up. So I think that just becomes a habit of ours. Most people don't even say their name when they pick up a phone, because you don't want to give that away. So when we think of these bad things that are happening in tech, I think we also have to flip around and say, but what are all the good things? What can we do with tech within our workplaces? And for me, one of the biggest benefits is we can use it to do a lot of the things that humans are only okay at, sort of those repetitive rote type tasks, and free us up for the things that we really, really want to do, and that we really want to grow and develop in. So if I bring it back to a learning, case, I would say, I'm using it a lot with clients for just back end stuff for their LMS or their LXP, right? I mean, why not? That's something that, I don't need a human to click through it, to do some of that. So I think we can also, flip it to the good side and say there are benefits. But we didn't ban telephones when people started making crank calls, or things like that. It's just understanding understanding the tech.
I guess, and I don't wanna dwell on the, necessarily in the dark side either, because I don't
Oh,
believe
no,
in
no.
the dark prophecies. We're very easy to go down that rabbit hole.
Mhm,
Um, the main difference I see just in terms of the examples is just that I don't see AI as a tool,
mhm.
in the same way that the phone might have been,
True.
or even the internet might be, because it's got cognitive, a bit like so, and you said that, like, that line between that, I have to think about that line between AI and humanity, or humanness,
Mhm,
is blurrier, I think, than I want it I might want it to be, and so there's some delegation of responsibility
mhm,
that makes me feel like I'm losing part of my identity. And even when we were talking before, as an
mhm,
instructional designer, as however much of that role is
mhm.
given off to another agent to take care of, what am I left with? I need to reconceptualize that.
Yeah, we do, right? So I'll break it down into a couple parts. The reality is that data is the oxygen for AI, right? And to be able to give you that hyper personalization experience where it truly knows you, knows where you're coming from, knows your background, like in history and all of that sort of stuff. It has a memory. That all comes down to you saying, "Here is my data," right? And when we talk about in the workplace, that's something I always talk to my clients who are ed tech vendors is that we have to talk about data privacy first because, do people even are they aware that everything is being tracked and it's feeding back data on these things? Right? Are you aware that Microsoft, if it's enabled, could be looking at how you use Excel or how you use PowerPoint and actually giving you a ranking in terms of what your skills are on some of those things, and that is a truly it's not that dystopian, right? Like, these are things that are already happening. So I think that there's an element of that. But for all this, I'm not sure I even have the answer. Like how do I, I think it's a recognition that the genie is out of the bottle, and if we're not using it, our users are going to be using it. I mean, right now you could type in build a course for me on perfecting my Polish grammar, right? We would already know from my other history is how well I speak and which grammatical points I struggle with and da 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 da, da and it could do that for me, and that's absolutely fascinating. But there is a cost to that, and to your point, and that actually gets rid of the instructional designer. So we need to think of what's next for the instructional designer because there is so much that we need to still have in terms of instructional design and learning experience design.
So what's next for me, Lori? What do I do? Where do I go?
I actually think there's a multitude of ways to go. And I'll run through them. So when I talk about a learning experience architect, um, it's not a course designer, but there are going to be different aspects of that role. So first of all, it may be actually training agents on how to build really, really good learning. So, okay, right now you could go to any LLM and say, build me a course on this. And it's going to build you like a, okay, course, but it's not gonna have all of the nuances, and it's maybe not going to use the learning theory that you would like. It maybe doesn't use a Socratic method, like whatever. So that's one aspect is actually, and by training, I don't mean you sit there and train it like a puppy, but meaning you're writing the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and you're refining how it's designing, and so that it can learn from how well it designs and constantly iterate. So I think that's one of the first tasks. The second one in the architecture is what I call designing trigger campaigns. The example that I would use is, say, for example, somebody has done level 4 in Spanish on whatever platform, Rosetta Stone. Okay. And then we say, okay, when a person reaches level 4, we're going to do a trigger. And the trigger will be the next time they log into Microsoft, it'll say, Hola, do you want to change your language settings to Spanish? And then Another trigger would be, okay, when they start to demonstrate a proficiency level in navigating through Spanish, we may say, okay, we're going to actually book a meeting with a team working in Colombia. And we would like you to, given your experience and their experience, we're going to do some conversation there. Then we're going to have your coach come in and see how well you're communicating on that. I'm using language as just a generic example for people to understand. But the idea of training or upskilling somebody in a skill from seed to fruit is now going to be a series of triggers rather than just course. So it could be a trigger will say, all right, we know that you're learning Spanish. So on Tuesday, when we see a break in your calendar, we're going to throw in, this particular grammatical point that we know that you're struggling with. And it's going to be different for everyone, but those triggers are going to be how the campaign works. And the triggers have to be human designed. I don't see AI just going in and say, oh, I'm going to just design against this. But on the other hand, the triggers will also generate data to see, was that campaign even good or not? Can we improve it? And then that's also too another point of AI. So I do see that other part happening, where I don't think learning is just going to be purely automated. We still have to build the automation, so to speak, and think very, very critically about what's that going to be. Conversation I had today with a client was, okay, so if we have our own little chatbot coach, and I said, well, yes, you have yours, but then think about the user experience. They have Copilot, they probably have, ChatGPT somewhere, and now they're going to have a learning one. All of a sudden, they're like Muppets, just ping, 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 ping on your screen. So that's another place for the learning experience architect to think about, is that whole employee experience and how they're actually interacting with learning. How does it appear in the flow of work? We don't want clippy, right? But we have to. Clippy walked so AI could run, but we need to think how that would be. And I think that's actually a much more sophisticated way to look at learning. I also think with the learning experience architect, it will be very data driven. You'll be analyzing, everything from, okay, do we start with learning objectives? Can we really prove in an A/B test of 1,000 learners that the learning objectives on the first slide really made a difference? Don't know. But we'll start to question some of those things because we'll have a lot more data points that we can crunch and look at. So those are about four of the different ways that I see the learning experience architect evolving. And there'll probably be even more evolution on that. But I don't think I also don't think we'll ever get rid of in-person workshops. I'm sorry. Like, people are still going to go to workshops. It's never going to go away. They may be led by the CEO or a clone of the CEO, for example, or something like that, but I don't ever see the workshops going away. So there's still going to be that.
See, I find that so interesting because it's in a career, like in my 25 plus years as an instructional designer, and all the training that I did to become one, and
Mhm.
when I used to teach students,
Yeah,
it we were never supposed to be like little course making machines.
right.
In the actual vision of instructional design, there's so many different formats and strategies to work with.
Absolutely.
It's never supposed to be send them to a course, one and done. They walk out, they know all the things.
Yeah.
Um, when I see a lot of right now, and I don't mean this in an overly critical way, but I see a
Mhm.
lot right now people who don't have a learning background creating learning,
Correct.
and so we have an idea of what learning is out in the world, and it's actually not what learning was supposed to be. Like, we know
No.
about blended learning, we know about mixing learning with performance support, we know about
Totally.
creative journeys, we know all that stuff.
Yeah. Mhm.
But I guess often, and I would say for myself in a corporate setting,
Mhm.
we kinda get dumbed down to we're course
Correct.
making machines.
Right.
So, I'm actually happy that I don't wanna be a course making machine.
No, and I think very few people do. And how many times do I hear, for I go on Reddit a lot, and go to the instructional design channel, and I mean, everybody's complaining, I'm building a course that I know nobody's going to use or nobody should be taking, right? And yeah, it can be fun to build a course. Like, there are some really good ones, but I don't see L&D as a course machine at all. I see L&D as more the neurons, enabling the movement, of the larger body. And I think it's also being very critical about saying, okay, how do we know what skills people need? What's the data for that? What are the triggers to then, pull that out? Who do I then identify with adjacent skills? Who do I then throw into a campaign of triggers? And what does that campaign even look like? And how do I identify success? How do I now bring in something that is a video avatar, conversation? If I do that, I need to design the rubric for that, because the rubric is not just going to be auto-generated. It has to be specific to my organization. And it's what am I deciding that that person actually has to achieve? And when they've achieved that, well, what happens next? So those are the things that I really don't see, at least right now, that AI is going to design for. Not at an, also too, especially not at an aggregate level at scale. I mean, we have to really carefully think that. We didn't want say, for example, Sarah, to all of a sudden be now in, 25 campaigns, and every spare moment it's throwing another thing at you. No, like it has to be carefully thought out, and it has to maximize or turn the volume up on skills that people really do need, and turn them down on skills that maybe are less important to the organization. It's about strategy of the business, and what skills do we need to execute the strategy, how and when. So I actually think courses are really going to be the least of what you do, except for workshops. But I think also too, just being able to do that performance consulting on scale, en masse, that's another wonderful thing that I'm already doing with clients. So there's I view it as a positive. I know it's scary and it's the unknown, but I also do see a lot of opportunity. If I flip it on the other side, it's not about us; it's about the learner on the other side. And if they're going to get a superior experience that's personalized to them, that has been data tested to work, that's the winner.
No, I agree. I agree.
Mm.
The only other thing that's come up for me lately is this, the personalized, hyper individualized,
Yes.
super targeted, right? So really efficient, and you get
Mm.
only what you need, and it's perfectly feeding you exactly what you need to progress.
Right.
And then I don't want to lose track of, and I was happy you said that about
Mhm.
workshops, because learning is also a very human,
Totally.
social
Totally.
experience, and we
Yep.
get a lot out of interacting with peers and hearing other people ask questions and
Totally.
getting feedback
Totally.
from people in the moment and doing all of that. It can't replace that. So it replaces some of the, maybe less efficient, boring. I'm sitting in a classroom and the teacher's
Yep.
droning on, and I already understand. I really don't get it, but I'm too shy to put my hand up.
Right.
Uh, we can offload some of that stuff as long
Mhm.
as we keep working on the parts that are about humans learning and sharing together. To I guess I just was starting to get concerned about, well, who's building those workshops? Am I needed to build those workshops? Sure.
You know what? I mean, I do think humans will still build those workshops, but it may be something again that they spar with a custom GPT on it, or it may be also something that even just identifying who goes on a workshop. It's not going to be, it'll be data driven. It'll be looking at, okay, these people, we've looked at, their emails. I don't know, and have found, what, they're not communicating beyond their silos or something, yeah, there's a lot of things still going to happen with it, and especially to, the workshops are the most ideal place for people to connect. A virtual classroom still is an incredible way, even across distance, for people to connect and discuss. What you could do though in that is, okay, somebody goes in a breakout room, somebody always has to take notes. Well, now we can just have Otter or come in and take notes, or and which is great, especially because it means you take off that load of somebody. You don't need to worry if you're spelling correctly or if English is your second language or any of those things. So that's where I also too like to see that work in together. It's thinking about how it can be an active participant.
And continue to improve, because it would be easy for
Correct.
me to say I've got examples of just this week where some of the automatic note taking in a
True.
certain platform was like, "Boof." I was like, "Were you in the same meeting as I was?" I mean, I could see how they got to that, but I
Yeah.
thought, well, that's really a lot of it was quite misleading. It's not good enough yet, but the more we use it and the more we learn, I don't want to fault it because it's in its infancy still, so it's going to get there. That's fair.
Correct, and you're going to need to look at which tools are going to work and mesh with your, with your ecosystem. And, another quote that was, expressed to me was, today is as dumb as it's going to be. right? So it is going to take time to learn. And even when it comes to like voice transcribing tools, or transcription tools, you have to fiddle with them and see, which one's going to work for which. I find some work okay in Zoom, others do not. So it is a bit of a, or if you're using, if you're in G Suite, sometimes the closed captioning is great, sometimes it's not, depending on accent. So yeah, you have to play with it, but that's no reason to say I'm just not going to use use the tools, because they can really do some help. They really can help experience and augment them to the next level.
So as you know, we
Mhm.
were originally scheduled to speak on Zoom, and then I switched it to another
Correct.
platform,
Correct.
and because I had heard some things about this platform, and
Mhm.
I knew just enough to know that this was going to be better. But now that I've signed up for it, and I get these little messages saying what it's capable of,
Yeah.
so I almost fell off my chair. It said, once you record your video,
Mhm.
if you're like, oh God, when was it that Lori mentioned that thing about the whatever? And in the old days, you'd have to watch the
Yeah.
was, especially like a week or 2 or a
Yeah.
month or 2 later,
Yeah.
it can do it by itself, and I'm like, "That just for that." So that's an AI thing. I'm like, "Well, thank you, AI, I appreciate that."
No, exactly, and it's just too about having the creativity, or the curiosity about some of these tools. I mean, I'm working right now on a project where, instead of sending out a newsletter, because everybody has a newsletter, we're looking at sending out a notebook LM that we've curated with particular assets that we found helpful over the past week, and then people can query it just like their own sort of a curated rug for them. And we're going to see how that works, and or they can throw it into podcasts. But the fact is that it will always be, those curated items that we brought to the forefront with particular questions that we wanted to bring out. So it's all about being curious and open minded to what's possible.
I'm actually super grateful I knew what you were talking about because I met with a friend last week, and he has a podcast, and he explained to me that in
Sure.
Notebook LM, you feed the sources, so it
Correct.
can't hallucinate, like, you say, "Just
Y-
only use these things,"
Yeah.
and he creates scripts for his podcast from it. And I
Yeah.
have to well, part of it kind of I was like, "Ooh, you use it to write your scripts. Oh," but gonna be open and curious.
Well, yeah, okay, so there's a lot of that, right? And but then, like, I challenge back and I say, okay, so, if somebody's not great at writing scripts, but they have an amazing voice and a way to communicate and a way to cascade information, does that need to be a barrier for them to do that? So I think there's also two letting go of some of those notions. I mean, I hear a lot of times we're saying, well, AI is cheating. Well, yeah, if you're throwing it and saying, can you write my whole essay for me, and everything, yeah, it's a little bit of a cheat. Fully admit, when I wrote my book, did I write my own footnotes? No. I pegged which every place that I wanted a footnote, and I said, here's the URL for them, and it did all of them in the right formatting. Was that a cheat or a hack? I don't think so. I mean, how many hours would I have spent of doing that? And is it really of any benefit? Would somebody say, well, you didn't really write a book because you didn't do the actual, footnotes with the formatting and the underlining with the commas and all that. So I think there's also things to say, can AI lower the barrier to entry for people who really, should be there, and actually be used as a tool to help. But again, you can also too, though, tell when it's an AI script. You still have to massage it. You still have to do something with it.
Well, he told me he still goes off on wild tangents with his co-hosts. I go,
Ex-
"Good." He can't help himself. He has to bring himself into it, so that's
exactly,
nice. That's
exactly,
great.
exactly. Mhm.
That's interesting. One of the ways that I've used it, first of all, I was a complete "don't even talk to me about AI" person up until last year. I think
Yes,
I felt the fear of I knew that
totally.
I was vulnerable in my
Yep,
career, and I just thought,
yep.
"Wow." And I talk to people who say, "Well, it's not gonna affect my job," and I'm like, "It's actually gonna affect every single human's job." So some people still think that they're,
Yeah,
not safe from it, but they won't be affected by it.
yeah,
I think I realized that I was in trouble. But so one of the things I did was, uh, so I am super interested in affective objectives.
nice.
So in
Yep,
the role of objectives, you mentioned that earlier, and that would be a whole
mhm,
other discussion. But I like the idea of trying to target emotions and states, feelings, confidence, motivation, as a very deliberate act within the design process, learning design
right,
process.
nice.
So I asked Chat GPT to make me a course outline for how they would create a course about affective objectives, and I already
Right.
had my outline.
Right.
So I said, "What would ChatGPT do?"
Yeah.
And so I got the outline, and I was like, "I'm gonna take this as just a snapshot of what the world thinks a course should
Correct.
be."
Correct.
And I
Mhm.
looked at it and I was like, "Ooh, I forgot that." And I put that in, but
Yeah.
then I was like, "Ah, but they don't have all of this
This.
stuff."
Correct.
And so that's what I'm gonna focus on in my course because I'm gonna assume that the general view on that
Mhm.
is very different from mine. So,
Exactly.
it was almost
Exactly.
like a way of I guess it's kinda like sparring, but it was
Mhm.
it's unique. Can I identify what's unique about what I'm trying to do and really push that?
Completely, completely, and sometimes it's a sense check as well, and and again, sometimes it can be completely wrong, so you gotta make sure, and, but yeah, it's 24/7 and it never gets angry at you, there's a lot of benefits to that, if it's 3 in the morning and you're asking the same dumb question over and over again, it just, but that's also a double-edged sword, right? Because sometimes it won't be critical, you actually have to tell it, "Please, because it's designed to keep you there as long as possible. We also have to remember that it's designed to be addictive. It's designed to be like a video game, and that it gives you a dopamine rush to tell you that you are the best instructional designer ever, and everything's perfect, and there's no mistakes. And you're like, well, I don't think quite that's true, but thank you. But yeah, it's like I love what you did there because then it's again it's that hybrid of working together.
It's baby steps. It's early days yet for me, but I'm trying to figure it out.
I think you're being too modest though, honestly, because I go into a lot of organizations and, you know, a lot of people are still figuring this out and there's a lot of people not even using it. So I think there's a myth out there that, everybody is ahead of me. And I really urge people to be like, no, calm down. And like the analogy that I use is that you go on Instagram on the night of a big game and it looks like everybody was at the game. Okay. Every single person was at the game and they've taken a selfie and they're all in the prime seats and all of that. But, here in Toronto, I actually just did some dumb data, and actually more people have gone to Toronto public libraries in a year, something like 12 or 13 times the number, than go to a single baseball game. So, you have to think of it in that way, and nobody's posting a selfie from the library. So or,
Actually,
you have.
I love going to public
I
libraries. I
love
check them out in different places.
I love public libraries, but the fact is you're probably not taking a selfie and being like, "Hey,"
That's
hashtag
why.
learning, right? So it's separating out, like, the people really working hard and looking at things rather than the ones who are, out there showing off that these are all the things that I'm doing, and there's certainly a lot of the posts that are out there, particularly on LinkedIn, are designed to make you feel like you're missing out. They're designed to make you feel like you're so far behind to get business for them or to make you engage with the post. Everybody take a deep breath. This is it's yes, it's moving fast, but it's not moving as fast as you think when it comes to really adoption. And it's only going to be adopted as fast as people really can digest it. And I think that's a reality. So there will always be people, super speedy, way off, and they're going to post about it. But everybody take a deep breath. Like, we're okay.
Thank you. I actually just I just did while you
So,
were finishing that. I was like,
yeah,
"Okay." Lori
yeah,
says it's gonna be okay.
it's gonna be. I don't know anyone has ever taken a calm a calm from me because I'm usually not very calm. But I really do genuinely think that because the more I start teasing apart when I see what people are doing and whatnot, um, it's not that they're lying. It's just okay. Let's break it down. Let's break it down.
And probably also about doing the work. And so it's
Correct.
for me right now, it's to say, "Okay, you had your panic.
Right.
Now look and see what's happening." And it's good
Right.
to know that about people might not actually be as far ahead as they seem to be.
Correct.
Because I think there's still a lot of it still feels kind of problematic to me in terms of how ready we are to do things in this in new ways,
Hmm.
and not to be protective of our ways of doing things, but sort of say, "What are the trade-offs?" I wanna be really clear about what the trade-offs are as I'm doing my work so that I understand if I'm working, say, for with an AI agent on
Hmm.
developing something and sort of trading ideas back and forth, what are some of the risks I could incur if I'm
Right.
not aware of them? Like, am I
Correct.
it bothers me. I wish it had does it have, like, a critique button, like it has a creativity button? Because I want it to be more I don't wanna hear I'm fabulous,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, what I always ask at the whenever I do prompting or when I'm working, back and forth, I do say, okay, I want you to put on this critical lens when you're looking at it. Okay,
Okay.
so say for example, I've built a business case. I've been working on a business case for helping a client who wants to purchase a certain piece of ed tech. Right, fine. I will say you are the CEO. Now, of course, no identifying information. Keep everything private. But I'll say you're the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company. Da, 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 da. Create that persona and say, what would you likely skim and scan on this? Or what would you pick up from this? And I try and get so it's less about just saying critique it, but it's through the lens that I want them to critique it. I always ask to, is there anything I haven't told you, or that anything that I've missed, any more information that you want? Anything you require clarity on, and I will say, please don't. Please, if I haven't done that, ask me, because these are just basic things. Does it always work? No. Sometimes you need to keep reminding. I mean, I even have given I asked my my LM for its name. It gave me a name, Maven. So I talked to her. But yeah, I asked those things back and forth. You have to think of it as basically a really basic intern that's just come out of school, and they'll go off in all sorts of directions if you don't rein it in. Well, that's what agents do. We haven't really talked about specific, what you can get agents to do, but yeah, they require extremely tight instructions and parameters that you want them to operate in. But it's fun.
That's yeah, that's interesting. I think that, you mentioned Philippa Hardman at the beginning,
Yes.
and to have a properly trained AI agent to develop
Mhm.
courses, to help you develop or to collaborate with in
Yes.
developing courses, you need to know what those parameters are.
Totally.
And so I think sometimes what does happen out in the world is people are developing courses, but they don't have the language and they don't know the concepts behind learning. And there's
Correct.
a little bit of that. I've been a student. I can
Right.
create a course, and you're like,
Of
oh,
course.
yes, yes. But
No, no.
but if they were working with an agent that had those parameters clearly
Correct.
defined, so it was providing a lot of the scaffolding, like we would normally say, like to help people get
Yeah.
to creating great courses or
Absolutely.
learning experiences. I should just take courses out
Yeah.
of my
No,
vocabulary.
no. But that's not exactly it, right? And that, and that it's trained to do that. It's trained to bring in that good learning theory. And then what I like to layer on top of those things is what I call closed loop reporting, where it's looking, okay, if somebody's taken this particular chapter or section of content with these learning objectives, however it was hyper personalized and presented to that person, did it actually result in a change? And if it didn't, then I'm going to flag it back. And so therefore that agent, we'll use agent in this case, begins to through machine learning begins to learn, what actually worked and what actually didn't. To see something like this in action, and I know I'm going to get hate mail on this because lots of people hate Duolingo, but I think it's probably some of it. I think is also to their marketing because they're like, oh, spend 5 minutes a day, and you too can go to Germany and speak fluently. No, you can't. Okay, Germany's it's languages do not work that way. But if you look at how it's designed, it's not random. And even when it's giving you random sentences, there is a reason. It's looking at billions of data points about how somebody learned a particular grammatical point, how they learned to conjugate a verb into the second person, for example. And it's that refined. Now, they're also teaching languages, which is very binary. It's either right or wrong, right? It's grammatically correct or it's grammatically incorrect. But think about if we put that lens on some of our learning and how much that then would change. We design a lot on gut instinct as well as theory, but that some of those theories haven't actually been tested with the same amount of rigor that we could do now, which I also find really interesting. I'm so curious to see, what things we end up saying, yeah, that actually doesn't work the way we thought, but this actually really does work in a way that we didn't think. So that's fascinating. But if you look at Philippa Hardman's, Dr. Hardman's Epiphany, it's fascinating tool, and it's exactly what you need. The difference between what you would get if in that, say, if you just went to Claude and said, design me a course, miles, kilometers of distance between them.
Amazing, well, the other thing I love that you mentioned data at least a couple of times, that you're actually talking about evaluation, which is one of the most elusive things in the
Oh,
world of
yes.
learning. We can actually demonstrate impact,
Right.
then, you know, that would go a long way towards legitimizing learning design as providing value to the business, that we could actually say, guess what? We implemented this learning strategy. The person was able to do this. Then
Mhm.
they were demonstrating it on the job. Then guess what? Your numbers went up. Like imagine if we could we could be like catch up with marketing as
Oh, I
demonstrating
mean,
our
the catch up with
value.
exactly, and the catch up with marketing completely. Like, marketing is able to do this, and if we move the dial this way, if we change it to blue, do people open the email more frequently? I mean, they have
Right.
some of this down to, down to an absolute science. And whether or not we get there with learning, I think we can get a lot closer. I think rather than simply saying, "Well, I think this would be a good exercise." Well, hold on. When do we use a drag and drop, and when would be the best case for that? And is it a drag and drop? And oh, we realize that this particular person actually is using a JAWS reader because they're visually impaired, so please don't give them the drag and drop. But you may want to give them this type of exercise. So there's so much. It opens up so many possibilities.
Ah, I'm taking many deep breaths now, Lori.
You should. You should. You should. You should. I don't think this is being the baby's not being thrown out with the bathwater, but I will say that those who dig their heels in to be purists, I think that's the ones where I say that's not going to probably exist. I wish you know I wish I could have kinder words, but you will need to embrace some of these tools and the capabilities.
I I actually, I mean, I'm not even opposed. I'm not opposed to that personally.
Mhm.
Now that I've kind of accepted that this is where things are going,
Yeah.
but I'm also just not opposed to that in general because there's a lot of bad learning out there. And so we're
Yes.
not doing the best that we could. So clearly things needed to change anyway. So I'll just take AI as my personal version of like,
Yeah.
guess what the universe is saying? You can be better at this. How are you going to be better at this?
I mean, I think that's a phenomenal way of looking at it, and indeed, there's we've all seen the bad learning, we've all made it. I
Yep.
know I have, where I've gone, "Oh, I hope that never follows me again. Never want to see that one again." Um, yeah, and I guess it again comes back to that user on the other end. We also have to think like they're being bombarded with so much stuff. They're being pushed that you have to be a master at prompting, you have to be a master at data, you have to be I mean, it's so much. So I mean, I take very much so when I think of learning, I take very much a servant attitude, servant leader attitude to what we're doing, and it is for that learner on the other end. If we can make it better for them, then I mentioned it before. Then I don't think we as the designers matter as much.